Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's roundtable with what I would consider UK's finest thinkers and practitioners on the subject of ageism and creating age-friendly societies. The UK, as many of us know, have been leading this effort in some creative ways, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their experiences and key learnings. I believe I've met most of you now, either personally or by Zoom, but those that I have not met, my name is Mebs Ramtula, and I'm the founder of What's Next. What's Next is a social venture that we started a couple of years ago, and its mandate is to develop a community-based digital ecosystem that will connect transitioners, and we define transitioners as professionals who are in transition over the ages of 50, to opportunities for flexible work, for learning, and for giving back, so that they may lead engaged and purposeful lives in what might be their third act. Today's event is part of an effort in bringing the What's Next community together and engaging them in a broader conversation around longevity and its implications, and specifically in the areas of work, giving back, and learning. And our moderators today are Rick Wolfe, a senior advisor at What's Next and a master moderator. Rick's eclectic mix of theater arts, advertising, and management consulting experience allows him to see past the ordinary and to create evocative and groundbreaking conversations. Rick is joined this morning by Carl Honoré, an award-winning writer, broadcaster, and TED speaker, and a dear friend and mentor of What's Next. Thank you, Rick, and welcome back, Carl. We also have several friends and colleagues joining us from across the globe, from the US, from Canada, from the UK, and as far as South Africa. So welcome, Linda Smith, and thank you for staying up this late. I think you're about 7 hours ahead of us or so. And a warm welcome also to our friends, Chip Connolly from the Modern Elder Academy, from Martha Devi from the Stanford Center of Longevity, Paul Irving from the Milken Foundation, and I haven't seen Jane Barrett, but Jane Barrett is being represented by colleagues from the International Federation on Aging. There's Greg Shaw. And Mark Gillis from the ILC Canada. Welcome all. And now over to you, Rick and Carl, to walk us through the next stage of this roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mebs, and welcome everyone from me as well. In a moment, Carl, Honoré, and I will be entering a conversation with Anna Dixon, Yvonne Sonsino, and Andy Briggs. First, and I'll tell you a bit more about them, but first, a few details on the session today. After this roundtable discussion, there will be a breakout session where we'll be turning to you for your perspective. And that will be followed by a plenary session where we'll all consider the key messages that are emerging and actions that might be taken. Now, the people you will be meeting. Carl Honoré, who has Scottish roots, grew up in Canada and now lives in London, England. His books, published in 35 languages, have been on bestseller lists in many countries. Carl's 2 TED Talks have well more than 3 million views. He has written extensively about how slowing down can help us lead happier, more productive lives. His latest book, Bolder, Making the Most of Our Longer Lives, is about aging and how we can do it better and feel better about doing it. Carl spoke to us at a recent What's Next event on slowing down and its benefits to us as we age. And you can find an extended video excerpt of that wonderful talk by visiting the What's Next community page on LinkedIn. Thank you for bringing your deep knowledge of these issues affecting the quest for a rich, longer life to today's conversation. Our panelists. Andy Briggs is Group Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Group, Europe's largest life and pension consolidator. Prior to joining Phoenix Group, he was CEO UK Insurance of Aviva, and he has more than 30 years of insurance industry leadership experience. He serves as the UK government's business champion for older workers, Take a look at recent statements Andy Briggs has made in the press on this subject, and you will see that he truly is a strong advocate of age-friendly workplaces. Andy, we have a lot to learn from the messages you're sharing on this topic and the work you're doing to bring about an age-friendly society. Thank you for being here. Anna Dixon, as Chief Executive of the Center for Aging Better, leads a charity working to bring about impact informed by evidence across 4 priorities: fulfilling work, healthy aging, safe and accessible housing, and connected communities. Previously, Anna was Director of Strategy and Chief Analyst at the UK Department of Health. She holds a PhD in social policy from the LSE. And as Anna, as Mebs mentioned, you really were instrumental in bringing about this event. Thank you for that and for being here today. We're truly grateful. Yvonne Sonsino, in her role as the global leader neXT at Mercer, is leading research on the organizational implications of macro trends such as increasing longevity and the future of work. With a master's degree in psychology, Yvonne is an advisor to the Healthy Aging Challenge Fund and is currently working on a global dialogue series, redesigning retirement for the 100-year life with the World Economic Forum. Yvonne Sonsino's book, The New Rules of Living Longer, reached Amazon's top 10 best-selling list. Yvonne, you are in the unusual position of being closely involved both in the research on age-friendly societies and working with businesses and governments to put that learning in practice. We're excited that you'll be able to share those lessons with us today. Carl, over to you.
Thanks to all of you for being here today. It's wonderful to be joined up here together. As Rick said, I've spent the last few years fighting against the cult of speed and the virus of hurry, encouraging people to slow down in a world that's got way too fast for its own good. But more recently, I've been training my energies on a different fight against a different cult, and that is the cult of youth and the ageism that so often goes along with it. And goodness me, there's a lot of ageism around these days, is there not? You may all have seen the news story last month. I've got the quote here. Mark Red, I'm guessing it's spelt, the CEO of WPP, one of the largest marketing and communications firms in the world, on a conference call with investors said the following. He said, "We have a very broad range of skills. And if you look at our people, the average age of someone who works at WPP is less than 30. They don't hark back to the 1980s, luckily." Now, the good news is that his remarks provoked an instant and ferocious backlash, and he was forced into a groveling apology for his flagrant ageism. The bad news, however, is that he felt it was okay to express that sentiment in the first place. And the fact that he did feel that way explains why we're here today and what we're up against. The 2 key questions that I grapple with in my book, Bolder, are what would an age-friendly world look like? What would a post-ageist society look like? And second question, maybe the most important question, and the one I hope will drive us today, is what can we actually start doing now to make that real? And it just so happens that those 2 questions are actually the 2 questions at the core, the center of this event today. So I'm itching to hear from our panelists on this subject and also from you, the participants, because as Rick has said, this is meant to be a conversation. No one here has all the answers. There are no oracles sitting in front of Zoom this afternoon or this morning. We're all here to share ideas, inspiration, and hopefully come up with something concrete forward with together. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to the panel with the way I'm going to do is we're going to have 1 question to each of the panelists. And then after that, general questions that any panelist can jump in on. And we're also inviting, as Rick said, people to throw out comments in the chats and even questions as well. So we want it to be a conversation, not a monologue of the deaf. Right. So I'm going to start by a question for Yvonne, which is sort of a broad question about what's at stake here. You know, what is at stake when we talk about this fight against ageism and the cult of youth? In other words, if we don't make our society, our world more age-friendly, what risk do we run? What danger do we run the risk of ending up in?
Thank you, Carl. And I think in terms of regrettable quotes, Mark Zuckerberg famously said, "Young people are just smarter." He's going to get old one of these days, hopefully. I suppose what's at stake? Gosh, so much. I think prior to the COVID epidemic, I suppose the key business case reason we would argue on this point is that our demographics are against us. We're not just living longer, but birth rates are shrinking. So for developed economies where this is really pronounced, so Japan is at the far end of the spectrum, for example, one of the super aged nations, living longer than everyone, lower birth rate than everyone. The demographics and the pressure on labour forces was immense. So I think in Japan, it's something like now, the turn of 2020, we're losing one employee every minute. So the population is shrinking by such a rate that we're losing one economic contributor every minute in Japan. So that was a massive issue at stake in terms of labour forces. Arguably now we have COVID and high unemployment. This one is a more difficult one to get to grips with. But actually what we're seeing is that the older age groups are some of the first to lose their jobs in the aftermath. So instead of keeping them in the workforce longer, which has economic benefits and great social benefits for them, well-being benefits and financial benefits, we're now losing them. I suppose the other big argument is that those longevity trends mean that financing later life is becoming a challenge. So at the moment, as we stand today, people in all of those developed geographies, let's take the top 8 developed geographies across the world with very mature pensions and savings systems and investment systems and really strong state pension support. People in those top 8 countries, on average, run out of money 8 to 20 years before they die. And so this whole issue around what does an age-friendly society look like, if we can't keep them in the workplace and earning for longer, the burden for their financial well-being is going to be an even more severe one on already stretched governments and health systems. But I'd say there's a further issue at stake here, and that is that getting older, it's about staying social and purposeful and all of the great well-being factors that come with that. So we need to keep societies age-friendly to be inclusive and to include them in all of the social participation, purposeful and meaningful activity for their well-being perspective. So they would be my few comments to offer there, Carl.
Thank you, Yvonne. Anna, I guess the sort of next step on from that is asking ourselves what an age-friendly, I mean, we're using the phrase, we're bandying it about, but what does an age-friendly society actually look like? I mean, we live in an era when we love metrics and measurements and data and stuff and things that, how will we know when we have reached the post-ageist promised land?
Well, I think we don't necessarily have great measures, but if those components of an age-friendly society that Yvonne was talking about there, for example, people being financially secure in later life, then we would not expect to see the rates of pensioner poverty that we do. If we were wanting a society in which people are healthier and living free of disability for longer, then metrics such as disability-free life expectancy, we would want to see more years lived in good health and free of disability. And indeed, that's a goal that the government in the UK committed to as part of the Grand Challenge on Ageing. Yvonne talked there about, age-friendly society is one where people can work for longer, also in good quality work. So we would want to see metrics that are showing that older workers at the moment, from about 55 on in the UK, there's a very, very steep decline in economic activity rates, so that the year before state pension age, less than half of people are in work. That's the sort of economic gap that we're talking about, and it obviously has economic implications, but for those people who want to be in work and who are not, they're missing out on all sorts of other aspects of work, not just the financial but the social and the things that give them meaning and purpose. So closing that economic activity rate between the older workers and younger workers would perhaps be another. And then finally, this point about sort of social purpose and well-being. Many of us will be familiar with the fact that if you look at life satisfaction, there is this U-shaped curve. And in fact, you know, if we were getting through the midlife crisis about, in our sort of late 40s and early 50s, actually we can expect to have higher levels on average of happiness and life satisfaction. In our sort of late 60s and early 70s, there is a little dip sort of right at the end of our lives. But, you know, ideally we would want to see people, you know, living very happy lives. And as I say, the majority do. But we know that critical to that is that they feel valued, that they feel that their contribution is valued. And you talk about ageism. At the moment, society associates old age with things around dementia, decline, and frankly, you know, you're 1 foot in the grave, death. So if we continue to see later life as something to be dreaded, to be feared, that is going to have an impact. I think we don't measure ageism, so it'll be hard for us to know when we're there. But we are conducting research right now to do more qualitative analysis of looking at that discourse. And frankly, in every domain of life, whether it's advertising or policy or the media, this age shift and old age are both portrayed in entirely negative terms. And so I think the other mark of an age-friendly society has to be one in which that age diversity is something to be celebrated, and the journey of aging individually is something that we no longer fear.
Thank you very much. Andy, Anna touched on a little bit there, and so did Yvonne, the workplace, and I thought maybe we would zero in with you on that field of human endeavor, because I found in my own research that it seemed that the toughest nut to crack when it came to taking down ageism was often the workplace. That's where it seemed to be most pronounced and most difficult to uproot. Now, I know that in your own life, working life, you've made a lot of progress in advancing age diversity and taking down some of that ageism in the workplace. I wonder if you could just maybe walk us through some of that journey, some of the things that you encountered, the pressure points, the obstacles, the things that you managed to do, what's still left to be done. Give us, just sort of tell us a little story about where you've been and where you hope to be.
Sure, Carl, but very happy to, and very much builds on what Yvonne and Anna have both said. So, I mean, the start point for me is actually as leaders in businesses, getting our heads around the fact that in the same way as I think a lot of us believe, and I certainly passionately believe, that a gender diverse workforce and business will perform better, that an ethnically diverse workforce would perform better, so will an age diverse workforce. And there's a strong body of evidence that multi-generational workforces will perform better. They'll make better decisions from a broader range of perspectives, better represent their customers, better represent their communities. And to the example of the advertising agency, I mean, it's absolutely classic that over 50% of consumer spending in the UK, and I'm sure that will be true of most developed nations, is by people aged over 50. So if the people doing all the advertising are all under 30, you know, the odds of you connecting with the target audience is much less than if you had a multi-generational workforce thinking about that. And a great example of this in practice is McDonald's in the UK, where they really have embraced multi-generational working. But what they have found is that in their restaurants that are multi-generational, have a multi-generational workforce and over 60s in the workplace, customer satisfaction is typically 20 percentage points higher, so hugely higher. So how do you go about tackling this? Well, up front, I think it's really getting to the core of the data and understanding what's going on. And there's a lot of myths that go on here. So one of the myths that I regularly hear is that, you know, I don't really want older workers, they'll take more sick days. The facts are that someone over 50 is half as likely to take a sick day as someone aged 20 to 30. That's the facts, the hard evidence. They're half as likely, not more likely. And another myth that I'll tend to hear is that workers aged over 50 won't stick around for very long compared to a younger worker who, you know, has got many more years ahead of them. The facts are that if you employ a 50-year-old, they are 5 times less likely to change jobs than a 20-year-old or 20 to 25-year-old, 5 times less likely to change roles. So I'd encourage employers first and foremost to get into the data. One of the things at my former employer, Aviva, which is one of the most progressive employers from a diversity and inclusion perspective I've ever come across. So, real strengths in that space. But what we found when we looked at the data at Aviva is that over 50-year-olds were 25% less likely to have a development conversation than under 50s. So just getting into that data, what we immediately did then was we put in place an intervention called a midlife MOT, which I'll touch on in a second, to try and address that. So again, critical is to get into the data and understand what your colleagues in your organization are telling you about what's going on. But then when it came down to it, to your question, Carl, about sort of practical examples, basically it boils down to employers doing 3 things: retain, retrain, and recruit. So in terms of retain, one of the most important things is that 1 in 5 over 50s have significant caring responsibilities, and it really is imperative to have flexible working and carer policies in place, and we can explore that more in a moment if you want. In terms of the retrain, exactly to the point I said, one of the best things to do is a midlife MOT, and that's an intervention for people typically aged 45 to 55 that will look at their health and well-being, that will look at their kind of wealth and their retirement planning, financial position, but also look at their career and what do they want to do in the next 20 years of their working life. Don't just do what you've always done. Do you want to do something different, explore some different opportunities? And then recruit, where unfortunately there's quite shocking levels of unconscious bias in recruitment that needs to be addressed. But all in all, embrace the fact that this is a real positive and opportunity to have a better organization, understand the facts, and then put specific interventions in place.
Thanks very much. Gosh, there's so much to dig into there. I want to react to everything. I'm sure everyone else does as well. Just a quick footnote to something you said there about the midlife MOT. One of the things that I've thought about and suggested in my writing is having a more regular MOT. So maybe at the beginning of every decade, like at your 30, 40, 50, 60, rather than sort of making it this sort of single pivot point and saying, at different stages of life, we've got our priorities are shifting, or the strengths and weaknesses we bring to the party in the workplace, society are different. We may want just to push pause and think about resetting or changing direction or something. Let me throw out a general question to the panel, which is this. The examples, especially that Andy, you're talking a lot about what companies can do in the workplace and so on. And I'm just wondering, there are 2 main pieces here, I suppose. There's the state, public sector and laws and so on. And then there's what happens in the culture. And I wonder if you feel that we have the laws, the regulation, the rules, the sort of legislation is there for a post-ageist society. The problem is the culture, or are there still laws that need to be changed and tweaked and so on? And I guess because you're all based in the UK, I suppose that's going to be a UK focused question, but I'll just throw it out, Anna.
Of course, we do have age as what we call a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. So, legally, and I don't know how that compares to other countries, age sits there alongside gender, race, disability, sexuality, etc. But obviously having it in law does not mean that it necessarily translates always into practice. And certainly, I think for a lot of employers, it hasn't been a diversity characteristic that perhaps has had the same attention or prominence as others. But of course, there's always more to do. In fact, in the UK, we've been lobbying quite hard and quite successfully, we hope, to introduce some legal rights for workers, particularly for carers, who we know obviously more of them at older ages are juggling work and caring. So important that there are rights for carers to have leave, to be able to fulfill those, similar to those that are there for parents of small children. So there are some sort of early moves to bring in a better carer. And the other is flexibility. Lots of people at different ages want flexibility for different reasons, but we know from research that older workers in particular, and those who are juggling health conditions, find flexibility particularly important to enable them to stay in the workplace longer. And yet many don't ask for it. And at the moment, it's something that you only have a right to after you've been in it for a while, which if you've got caring responsibilities or know that you can only take a job if you can do it flexibly, it's no use. So really pushing for flexibility from higher, the right to make that request from day one. So just a couple of examples to show how, you know, we have some legal rights, they're not very well implemented. There's always, you know, further to do to enhance rights for people.
Andy.
I mean, just to sort of quickly, if I just quickly build on that, so I completely agree. The two main things I'd want to see is statutory carer leave and flexible working mandatory from day one. The build for me though is you know, this horrific pandemic that we're experiencing at the moment. You know, very bad from many perspectives. You know, but if we can take some positive in amongst all that bad, it's the fact that we have, as a result of the pandemic, learned a huge amount about flexible working, and what an opportunity for us to rewrite the rule book on flexible working, and that will be great in terms of older workers, but also for, you know, for maternity returners, for you know, for a whole range of reasons, and I think also. Certainly the UK experience, I'm less clear in Canada, but the UK experience has been pretty bad in terms of care homes through the pandemic, and therefore the desire for people to stay at home rather than going to care homes is much greater, and so that kind of caring support and the, you know, the demand on carers has gone up a lot. So it's become accentuated, a bigger opportunity as a result of the pandemic, I think.
Andy, care homes have been a black mark in Canada too. We have a question in the chat box from Dorothy Engelman, and Janine Vanderberg says, I'd love to hear your response to this. The question is, as a business owner, the challenge is the cost of compensation for over 50 staff. It can be very burdensome. Can we reset expectations about salary in the 50+ group to encourage employers to reframe, envision an ability to retain these demographics?
Well, maybe I'll take that one actually, because working in the HR consulting industry, I have a few data points to hand to sort of respond to that. And I think this is another one of the myths. Andy pointed out a few myths earlier. This is another one. When you actually examine pay data, and I did for my book, I looked at 1 million data points on UK pay, and I looked at what happens to people's pay across a sort of longitudinal, from an age perspective, in the same job. So if you look at somebody who stays in the same job, as they get older, their pay drops. As they get older, if they take on more responsibility, therefore a more senior role, yeah, pay climbs. But in the same job, pay drops after about age 45. It's actually earlier than that in some professions. And so it was interesting to examine why that is. And we've done analytics, had a deep, close look at that. And pay compensation is often linked to your end of year performance grade and rating. And performance rating scales are often set on a quota system. So, you know, you as a manager of a team of 20, you can award 2 A-star grades, and the rest have got to be somewhere around the middle, else we'll skew the whole thing and the whole bonus pool will fall apart. And so what we found is actually the older age groups aren't getting those high performance awards because the younger up and coming staff in the same teams are getting a bigger than a proportionate share of them. So pay for them climbs. So actually there's a lot of disconnect with that point about compensation. And yet actually the person who asked the question makes a very good point, because the majority of people impacted most early and in largest numbers in a redundancy exercise tend to be the older workers. You'll see that globally. This isn't just a UK issue or an industry specific issue. It's a general theme that happens, and that is often because they are in more senior jobs and are deemed a bigger expense. So I would dispel that one as a myth backed up with 1 million data points.
Can I just throw in a sort of, I think the question was partly going towards the culture. Is it not the case that there's a cultural expectation that as you age, your salary should be going up, and somehow if you're earning less next year than you were learning last year, that's failure, or it's a failure of personal failure, it's a failure of the system somehow? Is that not wired into our cultural thinking about how career trajectories work, and does that not need to be unpacked and maybe rethought?
It is, and I think it's a sudden realization that comes as part of that midlife crisis that both Anna and Andy have alluded to. Actually, you reach that midpoint in your life and realize, well, my salary isn't going up at 10% anymore, and I'm not getting those promotions anymore, and I'm not getting those exciting assignments anymore, and you start to take that very personally. And it's actually just what happens. Career progression the trajectory is steep in those earlier years, and it tails off, it plateaus around the age 40, 45 mark, and people do start to feel bad about themselves. It's almost a learned helplessness. They start to believe that they can't learn anymore and that they're washed up. I've got a friend in his 50s who says, I'm washed up now, I can't compete. And he's gone into this real period of severe depression as a result of that, and it's linked to that workplace culture of constantly wanting to do better.
Can I come in? Because I think this is such an important thing that it's not as well for really individuals to try and solve this, because I think otherwise they are sort of almost fighting against the culture and expectations which have very, very strongly wired into our system, which is you do all your education at the beginning. You've then got, to try and work your way up the career ladder and earn as much as possible. And usually you'll burn yourself out at that point. You've missed out on often lots of other things in your life, like your children growing up and so on, in order to save enough for this idea that a retirement should be a third of our adult life. So, obviously Andrew Scott has also written about the sort of idea of a new pattern of 100-year life, but the challenge I put out in the book is, it's actually got implications for pension savings, this idea that, you've got to sort of earn that in order to save enough. Actually, we've just got to reset expectations. And again, I think the economic impacts of COVID are necessarily going to reset some of these expectations, that people are going to have perhaps lower living standards to some extent, lower consumption, and we need some of that for climate change anyway. That, there will have to be times where they save some, but then there'll be times when they're either caring or learning or relearning to actually smooth it out. And that way, hopefully as well, people won't be burning out, feeling washed up at 50, but will be able to sustain a working life for longer. But it does need rewiring. It needs rewiring in terms of lifelong learning and education. It needs rewiring in terms of our career expectations, in terms of financial services, and that how we blend and at different times of our lives, the saving and the drawing down, the saving and the drawing down, rather than this sort of one period where we do all of our saving and then the end of our lives where we do all of our drawing down.
Andy Briggs, Yvonne Sonsino, Anna Dixon, what has struck you in today's conversation? Andy, would you mind going first?
Yeah, no, more than happy to. I mean, I think if I sort of think about it from an employer perspective, I mean, my overriding thought would be, and just building on the previous comments, that what we need to do is have organisations really embrace the fact that inclusive and diverse businesses will be better businesses. They will make better decisions from a broader range of perspectives. They'll better represent their customers, their communities. And there's a real positive in that. And many of the interventions that as an organisation you need to take to be genuinely inclusive and diverse would apply equally across all different protected characteristics. And so, don't necessarily just try and tackle age. Think more broadly about diversity and inclusion across the organisation, and embracing that an inclusive and diverse organisation will be better. And encompass age within that, alongside ethnicity and gender and disability and sexual orientation and so on and so forth.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Anna Dixon.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just been struck, and it's very timely to have this conversation across so many nations, that, you know, this is about creating an age-friendly world. So I've written a lot about, and we've talked a lot today about what we're doing in the UK. But I think there is a lot for us to learn and exchange from one another. And I think there is value in connecting those of us who have got it. I know there's also a real need, as was clearly said earlier, that we need to get others to the table, you know, that too many people haven't yet woken up to the age shift and haven't yet understood what it is they need to do. But those of us who have, I think there's a real need for us to connect and make sure that we are, you know, supporting one another and exchanging knowledge, so we're not reinventing the wheel in different countries. And I think that's the power, really. On the beginning of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, we support the UK network of age-friendly communities. I know Canada has a very vibrant network of age-friendly communities. So I think there is a real opportunity for us to build and learn from one another, as we've been hearing today from Andy in Greater Manchester. And I do think that whilst the politics at national government in many countries are pretty difficult at the moment, I think where there is local leadership, we've really seen, and also that bottom up. I think we were hearing about that today, about, you know, shaping our own communities and shaping our own lives. So I think it's those things coming together, local leadership and the action of communities, to really make a difference, that's going to help deliver the age-friendly world that we all want.
Thank you very much, Anna Dixon. Yvonne Sonsino.
Well, what strikes me always at these discussions of like-minded people who get this is the divisive nature of generational conversation. And we've already heard it. Andy Burnham made the point about now it's time for older people to support younger people. I always advocate for doing things that are good for everyone. So forget about whether you're young, middle, old, young. Let's do things that really benefit society as a whole. And there are plenty of those. So for example, in the workplace, flexible working, it works for everyone. It works at every life stage. I've got a colleague who's 65 and has just become a father for the first time. You know, it's individual differences are greater than generational differences. So I would advocate for us all to find solutions that work across the generations. And the final thing I'd comment on is we're in a really difficult, unusual time where so much has been accelerated. Digital has been accelerated, collaboration has been accelerated. You know, it's wonderful to be able to talk to you all like this. But in this very strange time and that acceleration, it puts many of us in the mode to experiment and redesign. And that's a lot of the work I'm doing with the World Economic Forum. And I was speaking on another panel earlier today, and for my final word, and I said, experiment. Now is a time to really seize people's appetite to do things differently and harness that acceleration. So I would say we've got to try stuff. We've got to be brave and bold and experiment and try stuff. Thank you.
What a wonderful experiment, what a wonderful final word. Thank you so much. In just a minute, I'm going to be handing the floor to Carl Honoré and then Mercer for their thanks to everyone for today. Carl, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rick. And wow, I can't believe it was an hour and a half, just poof. So much to say, learn, unpack, parse. I mean, thrilling. I'm going away with all kinds of food for thought. And I know that there are all kinds of other directions we could have gone in. And I hope this is really just a springboard for maybe this group or, you know, members of it to take some of these ideas forward. I just want to echo pretty much everything that was said by the panelists in the way out. I want to thank them personally as well. Thank you, Yvonne and Andy, for stepping up and doing such a splendid job. I mean, I just want to throw one thing out. I mean, I love that last thought of Yvonne's for experiment. We heard a lot about the different generations and baby boomers and so on. I'm Gen X, I suppose, technically. I also feel we want to move away from, you know, putting people into age bags. And we want to start this conversation younger and younger. And I would really advocate getting this on the curriculum in some form or another, getting children to think about, in the same ways, I mean, my kids are being taught at school, were being taught at school in primary about sort of racism and sexism and all these things, throw ageism in there as well, and also get them thinking about longer life, not as the old 3 stages of learning, earning, and then pension, leisure, but something much more fluid and personalized and bespoke and exciting. So I think let's start young, right? So experiment and get the young going. And I think those are 2 good starting points for reimagining, resetting, and rebooting the world in ways that I think we all want. So thank you very much. I've been thrilled to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you for the excitement and focus that you've brought to it too. Medjum Tula.
Well, what can I say? It's been an absolute pleasure to host this event. And I want to first thank my team that actually put it together. I think the purpose of today from a What's Next standpoint was very much to get, like-minded people together. We've done that with Carl, who was a presenter at one of our What's Next coffee chats, as was Chip Conley. And I think we're trying to help create the conversation on the mission, which we collectively share. So it's less about our project and it's more about the mission. But I think if the mission moves forward, the project moves forward too. And I think enough has been said in terms of where we are. I think in Canada, we're still at a very early stage. And I really look forward to engaging with all of you in helping us bring the conversation forward to create some momentum. And as somebody said, this is a global issue. It's not a Canadian issue. It's not a UK issue. It's a global issue. So thank you again. And Carl, what can I say? Well, it's been absolutely wonderful interacting with you. And thank you again for agreeing to co-moderate this morning. And we look forward to seeing you again. And I think we would like to see some action come out of it. So no doubt I'll be in touch with many of you over the coming months to see how you can help us bring this alive, if you like, and in a practical way in the Canadian environment. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.